And I know I really certainly worked through it, and it took me more than a year or so to get myself really
multiple times. For those of you that have been through this before, I apologize, but hopefully you will learn something new. Please feel free to stop me, ask questions as we go along. I don't mind at all. If something doesn't make sense still, please just ask and I will continue to clarify. A lot of financial terms, just a lot of stuff in here. So first meeting of the year. Yay. Thank you all. We're going to review the committee charter, look at the timelines for activities, give you the milestones of when I'll be looking for approval and recommendations from the committee, look at our overview of our fund types, the major revenue and expenditure categories, provide you some glossary terms, just a brief overview of our financial ratios, and anything else that might pop into your minds during the day. This is the charter for Finance and Administration Committee. I believe that this was reapproved or redone last spring. Chris, do you want to?
That's correct. The board approved it at its May meeting.
Perfect. Do you want to walk through this or do you want me to do it?
Feel free to do so yourself.
Matters of interest for you and areas that the administration at Eastern needs your assistance on, looking at the budget. Obviously, you're going to approve an operating budget every year. Someday we will move to a biennial where you're doing 2 years at one time. That is my dream before I retire. You also look at capital budgets, expenditures that are over $1 million or $2 million. All of our capital projects run through the committee. So you see a lot of information throughout the year. Investments and finances. Each year you'll receive an investment presentation from the executive director at USSE, University Shared Services, where the POF money is held and invested. So that usually in January, at the January meeting, maybe at the April meeting this year. And you're also going to look at our financial statements. You're going to approve tuition, room and board, our enrollment, our mandatory enrollment fees. So that will happen as well under your purview. Capital planning, real property. If we buy property, we build a new building. You'll see all of the materials that go to the HEC as we try to determine what our priorities are for the capital side of things. Audits, both external and internal audits, will be coming before you. Compliance matters and risk management matters. So all of those things fall within this committee. Not that you don't know your meeting schedule, but it just helps for me to be able to share when I'm going to need things from you. So this was a special meeting we added to do a lot of this work and just be able to share out some of the details of what the committee does, talk about our finances from fiscal year 23 before we really dive into the rest of the work for FY24 and beyond. There's a meeting on the 24th of October, so you get 2 this month. January and April, there's also 2 meetings. So a couple of busy months there throughout the year. In October, you can expect to see the Q4 management report, which is today. You'll see that. Review and recommend to the full board the annual operating budget at the next meeting, although I will show you the draft budget today so that you're well prepared to make that decision at the end of October. You're going to see the Q1 management report at the next meeting, and we'll provide you a historical overview of the revenue and expenditures. It's consolidated, obviously. You're going to see a lot more than that. January, the big pieces are looking at the peer data for tuition rates because it sets the stage for approving the tuition rates at the last April meeting. You'll continue to get more historical information on tuition, room and board, mandatory fees, kind of what the directions are going for each one of those areas. You'll see the Q2 management report for approval in January, and our financial statements will be presented by our external auditors in January as well. Those will need to be approved and at that meeting. April, 2 meetings, so it's a lot. You see room and board rates, tuition rates, anything that you have to approve, you typically see that twice. So you see a first read and then you see it for approval. That way we can make any adjustments to those before you have to actually make the decision.
Excuse me, Leanne, can I interrupt you? Sorry. Would you just go through the years when you call what I found that so confusing about when the years start and end?
The fiscal years?
Yeah.
Yep, our fiscal years are July 1st through June 30th. So we are currently in fiscal year 24. Finished up fiscal year 23, obviously, and we're looking ahead to fiscal year 25. When we talk about it in terms of a biennium, the terms are 23 to 25. So it's sometimes kind of confusing. That help?
Right. Yep.
Okay. So you'll see presentations on tuition proposals, room and board rates, the budgets for both of those, the mandatory fees, plus the annual operating budget, which includes all the auxiliaries, designated ops and service departments. You also see the Q3 management report. And then at the final meeting in April, I'll come back, same presentations, probably modified presentations, but asking for approval, recommendations to the full board at the May meeting. So, questions about the schedule, timeline? That's not the only thing that'll be on your agenda. Each agenda will have a standing item for the internal audit. They won't always be here, but they will provide you with an update on the internal audit. Capital, John Garlitz from Facilities and Planning will present or provide you with a written report at each meeting. And we're hoping that this year we'll also have some additional information on enrollment to be able to provide to you in terms of enrollment and how that moves to dollars at each one of the finance committee meetings. And that's a little bit different because that's typically housed at ASA, which probably will continue still. But we want to make sure that this committee can connect the enrollment to the dollars and not have me do it. So you can see we're already, we're going to talk about 23, we're going to talk about 24, we're talking about 25 and beyond. It's kind of a little split personality for me this time of year. The 4 major fund types that you look at in the quarterly management reports and that we typically talk about the most are education in general, E&G, fund type 11, state dollars. It's all transferable. It's all the same thing. It just depends on who you're talking to and what their terminology is. It's our major source of funding. It's where all of our tuition goes. Our state funding, auxiliary services, designated operations and service departments, and a little bit on the capital side. I don't typically report it in the quarterly management report because they don't assist us with the operating piece of it. But you will see some additional financials on those projects as well.
Leanne, one time for me, sorry. Would you just emphasize how much that we pretty much concentrate on E&G and the finances of the fund balance, and that really is the main thing we usually do is E&G? I always found that kind of confusing.
I will. It's a little bit further down. Okay. I can't, just not capable of changing. So education in general it's our biggest source of funds, about $52 million, $53 million in revenue, 55-ish in expenditures right now. And the revenue budget consists of all the funding we receive from the Public University Support Fund. It's just where the state fund come in, state allocations come in. It's also our tuition, our student course fees, any internal sales, miscellaneous revenue. But obviously the bulk are state funds and tuition that are in there. Expenses, the bulk of them, 70 to 80% of the expenses in our E&G budget are people. That's compensation, whether it's salaries or our fringe benefits. It's also supports the libraries, the administration, the maintenance of the campus, everything that happens on the campus is on the operations side, beyond those things that we would consider capital projects like new roofs and wraparounds and all of those things. But just maintaining the buildings comes out of our E&G. So auxiliary enterprises, housing, dining, parking, student health, athletics, a portion of athletics, general rentals, this building here, integrated services building, and our student incidental fees run through the auxiliaries. The auxiliaries are intended to break even at the end of the year. They're intended to be self-support. So every dollar that they bring in should support their operations. The university can take what's called an overhead fee from them, which we do for most of the auxiliaries. We don't do it for students because it's like taxing them twice. So we ask you to pay a fee, and then we take that fee, and then we take a little more from you as well. So we have some agreements with some of the funds to not charge the full overhead rate for them. Drivers of revenue for these areas: health service fees, room and board, incidental fees. Those are managed by the students. Parking fees and fines, athletic ticket sales, sports lottery. The $3 million from sports lottery rolls through the auxiliaries. General rental income and the integrated services building income. We just split those out because we used to have a debt service. We've paid off our debt on this building, but we kept them in separate funds, and it was always important to just separate the integrated services building from the general rental, but it's really a lease. That's what we get from it. On the expenditure side, we have a health services contract with Oregon Health Sciences University, and we have counseling services, mental health services that we provide internally. There are personnel, room and board expenses, bond debt, student athlete expenses. It's really what it takes to operate the sports, parking enforcement, lot maintenance, and student activities. So a lot of activity in this particular fund. Designated operations, smaller, is about $650,000. 80% has to goes toward academics. So it's more of an accounting thing of how we have to split these out. But you'll see field trips, athletic donations that are not ran through the foundation come through here, athletic camps, the Rev Center, library services, and then the expenditure side of all of that activity. It's not a huge fund at all. Service departments, are down to a very few service departments, and these are things that just support the campus itself. So audio visual, the work that Gib and his team do runs through as a service department. It's just another accounting thing. Our telecom revenue, library copy services, and again, the expenditures that reside with those things. If you've been on the committee for a while, you'll notice that motor pool is no longer included. We made the decision at the end of the year to not have a motor pool department any longer on campus. We were down to 2 vehicles. So it was just more cost. It cost us more to operate and maintain than to be able to keep those. So if you want a motor pool, you're going locally, and we're supporting the community now and stuff. Out of all of those, E&G is about 88%. Non-E&G is 12%. So of our whole, those 4 fund types, obviously the E&G is the largest. I'm going to switch a little bit. If you're going to see a lot of that information in the quarterly management report. And I'm just going to keep talking about it over and over and over. What is it? 3 times? If you hear it 3 times, you remember it. So I'm going to switch to the Student Success and Completion Model, SSCM. This is how we receive our funding from the state for the most part. So in 2015, this model was put into place that looks at outcomes and student credit hours for Oregon residents. So this model supports the 40-40-20 goals of the state of Oregon. So that was the initial round. It was revised in 2021. The model has weights, enrollment, and resident student graduation to promote the success of Oregon educational attainment goals. So really, every Oregon student we get funding for through a very complex model. but it's only Oregon resident students. The last model, in 2021, the revision, we would say it didn't positively impact us. We just kind of held our ground on it. So we'll look at it again every 4 to 6 years. So we'll be looking at another revision before long because time flies. So in the model, there's 3 primary categories. Mission support funding, funding that's off the top. So there's a bucket of money that I'll run through in a minute. This comes off the top, and it used to be called line item funding, targeted funding. It's been changed. It supports the rural areas. There's a few different things that go into it. It's about a $79 million piece of it that comes off the top. Activity-based funding, student credit hours. So every credit hour that an Oregon resident completes during the year, we get funding for those. And the same with outcomes-based or completion. So degrees and certificate, each one's weighted differently. There's different fundings for transfers versus non-transfers, bachelor's versus master's versus certificates. So I could talk about it all day long. Literally all day long. But you are going to get a full separate presentation today on the whole SSCM. So we talk a lot about accounting versus budgeting. So one looks back. So our financial statements, our ratios, our composites all look back and all use the entire institution's financial position. And then budgeting, we really focus on just those 4 operating funds and management report. So you see kind of both of them. I only pointed out because in some cases it's confusing when we're talking about just those 4 funds, and then all of a sudden we switch and we're talking about the financial statement side of things. So one's really operating ledger stuff, the other one is balance sheet, cash management stuff. Very briefly, I won't make you listen in on all of the financial ratios because after our 23 financial statements are approved, you'll get a full presentation on where our ratios are at. Ratios are important. They provide another look at where we are financially, beyond just our percentage of revenue against our fund balance on E&G. So these are the primary ones. We use these in our financial statements. HEC uses them as well in our conditions report. They're not super complicated, but they're not things that we deal with every day because they're all in our financial statement. So there's some that we are really close on, and there's some that we will never be able to achieve just because of our size. So they're a metric, and you kind of have to take it a little bit with a grain of salt, depending on where we are institutionally. Again, it's a holistic view of where we're at. So you can't get super focused on just one thing and why aren't we moving it. However, when we're making financial decisions, we do look at these to project to see how they might change. So if we're going to invest in debt, we're going to look at this financial ratio for debt burden and see where that's going to come out as we take on that extra debt. I added this slide. This is just the historical overview of our tuition rates, just to give you an idea where they're at, in case you get asked questions out in the public. Why has Eastern raised their tuition rate so much? This gives you an idea. We have raised our tuition rate since 2016 for undergraduate on campus by 36%. On average, that was a $51 change per credit hour from 2016. Average annual increase has been $5.67. So again, just more educational for you when you're out in the public. Why are these things changing? Because we all like to just talk about, well, Eastern raised their tuition by 57% without any context behind it, and that just gives you the ability to break it down a little bit more should you be asked. Tuition rates that were approved last year, and just educational. This shows the rates by classification. So on campus undergraduate resident tuition, $191.50, went up 4.9%. Non-resident on campus went up 3.5, off campus 3%, and graduate programs went up 2%. So just you'll get a lot more information during the year as we get ready to set the 24-25 rates. Just a reminder, on campus undergraduate resident tuition rates above 4.9 have to be approved by HEC. So it's that plus a couple of other fees that get wrapped into that 4.9%. So we're always aware of that. Doesn't mean that we can't go above it. But you'd have to make that decision, and then the presentation would have to be at HEC. No reason that we wouldn't do it. I mean, we want it to stay affordable, but it does fall out. It's a weird thing where it falls kind of outside the cycle. So boards often approve, and then the HEC meeting is after you've already approved. So a couple of institutions have fallen into that piece of it just because of the way that the HEC meeting falls. These are our mandatory, what we call mandatory enrollment fees, student incidental fees. This is managed by our students. They make the decisions on this, and then they make a recommendation to the president, but it does roll into the overall package. For 23-24, student incidental fee is $354 per term. It falls into fund type 22, which is an auxiliary. Student health is $320 per term. Hoke renovation fee, $28 per term, and the building fee, $85 per term. Both student health and incidental went up last year. The other two did not. The Hoke renovation fee can only go to pay the debt on Hoke. The building fee, we have more latitude. We have some debt we have to pay off that was legacy debt. But we increased the building fee by $40 a couple of years ago to be able to put aside some money to do renovations in areas where our capital funds can't be used or are not prioritized. So we'll be looking at things like Hoke. We have a meeting with student leadership at the end of this month to talk about what can we do in Hoke with some of the building fee money. Are there other areas in Quinn that we might want to do? It's not a lot. It's going to be more cosmetic things than anything, but it means we don't have to take it out of ENG, and we're able to continue to support those facilities. The next few slides are just deeper dives into the glossary and terminology. I don't read all of these. You know most of them, but as you see the reports, student fees, that's all of our tuition and course fees, matriculation fee, application fees, all of those things fall into student fees. Also, fee remissions fall in there. So fee remissions are a negative revenue. It's the weirdest thing to say. Negative revenue, so it reduces our gross tuition down. Fee remissions are our scholarships, allowances, discounts. It's an accounting thing. We have to account for them in that respect. But you'll see in some cases where we talk about gross tuition and then we break out the fee remissions. In other cases, it's netted. So just important to keep in mind. Government resources allocations, this is where all of our state funding comes through. It's not just our SSCM, it's also we receive money for student small energy loan program. It's pass-through money. They give us money, we pay it back to them. Our benefits navigator funds roll through here. Our Strong Start funding will roll through here this year. So it's more than just our SSCM, but we tend to focus mostly on that. Gifts, grants, and contracts. The bulk of this is in our indirect cost recovery. So when we get some grants, typically we'll get some indirect to manage those. Investments is usually investment income. Sales and service can be event income, library fines, housing and dining, parking, deposit forfeitures, transcripts, all of those things. These terms of glossary terms are for all of the funds. So it's kind of they show up everywhere. Salary information for various reasons, and this is at what we call the account type level. We split out salaries so we can report on them at unclassified salaries, which is faculty and administrative professionals, unclassified pay, which is usually overload, one-time payments, classified salaries, pay, student pay, graduate assistance, benefits. This is one level of our chart of accounts, and then it drills down even deeper so that you can track all of the different movement on our salary lines. Other payroll expenses, we call it OPE or fringe. It's really our retirement contributions and our healthcare contributions. It's significant. It's also our FICA and Social Security, Medicare tax and stuff, but our OPE costs are high. Our healthcare benefits are great. But they're costly to the university. So service and supplies, this is everything that we buy that isn't above $5,000. When it gets above $5,000 as a capital expense, this is not capital as far as buildings. This is just a capitalizable expense that falls into this category. And student aid, tuition payments, same concept as a fee remission, just from accounting purposes. If this is paid out of anything except for E&G funds, we can actually categorize it as student aid. So it has the same impact for the student. It just looks different on the financial statement side of things. Internal sales reimbursements, if we're moving money around, a lot of times it's with our AV department. So E&G gets charged. It comes in as an internal sales reimbursement. You don't care, but that's what it is. Transfers in and transfers out. There's another way that we move money around between funds. So we can't just move revenue and expenditures in a lot of cases. We have to use a transfer code to be able to do those. I do have, last year we did a lot of them. It was pretty significant. So I do have a breakout so you can kind of see what that kind of activity is.
Wow. Anybody think that's pretty simple and straightforward, huh? Jeez, Louise. How about questions?
I have-
Here you go, Richard.
Chair. Just going back to the student fees. I don't know if you can go back to that slide, and I think I saw per term. I did just, again, quick math in my head. That was around $700 when you combine all of those right there per term. And I'm just thinking we're trimester, so 3 terms, so around $21,000-ish for a student. And I was wondering, or 2,100, sorry. Is that like pretty high? It's pretty small relative to other universities similar to Eastern Oregon or in the state? That kind of information I'd like to know just in general to see if we overcharge or undercharge or we're just right.
Yep, absolutely. And I should have included that. I did share that with Dr. Ryan yesterday as far as how we look in comparison with the other institutions, and I can bring that back.
What would be I do want to see that, but what's your approximation? Are we just
Yeah,
right?
we are lower. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
If I may add something as well, one of the things that we see happening not only in the state, but across the nation is hiding tuition charges by moving things to fees. And one of the things I've been impressed with since arriving here is that this institution hasn't done that, right? They haven't moved fee dollars from tuition to preserve the university's financial statements because some of those costs feel hidden to students. And so we want to be really mindful of that. And as I recall, Leanne, we were doing really well in comparison with the other state institutions, in addition to, of course, having the lowest tuition. So we're not misleading students.
Brad, just following up on George's comment, if you could provide us that document along with the tuition document that compares tuition fees combined so that we could just have an idea, like George says. That would be helpful for me. The other one informational question, if I might, does the university own this building or lease this building?
We own it. Tells you how long I've been around. It was one of the very first projects, kind of a partnership with the state of Oregon. So at the time, we just paid off the debt, so it must be 20 years ago. We were looking at academic expansion. And so we had this grand idea to build this facility over here. Forward thinking, 20 years, you're going to have all this enrollment, you're going to need this space. So we did that. We didn't need it. So we partnered with the state of Oregon. And so they leased the facility, these folks out here, leased the facility and essentially paid the debt on it. So it's one of the, very positive things that happened at Eastern. It worked on paper, it worked in reality, just like it looked on paper. We didn't pay any of the debt service and stuff. So, I'll show you on one of these 7 presentations,
Yeah.
just how much going forward. So now we're able to invest some of the lease revenue into renovation of the building. And at some point, we just signed another long-term lease with them, but at some point, ideally, we would take it back over, and be able to teach out of this.
When I was on a state board, when the building was first conceptualized, and I remember all the things that the state was going to put in here, but I guess I missed the whole part where the university ended up building it. So that was a surprise to me. So thank you on that. The other question I had, and then I'll shut up. You said that with the 21 revision of the formula, that the university kind of held its own. And I see that the budget increased, and I think the way I'm interpreting that is what you're saying is the increase keeps up with inflation, and so we're holding our own that way, even though it's going up and we're not getting advantages of. Am I interpreting that correctly?
Yeah, part of it is it's a finite pot of money that we get that runs through the SSCM. So we didn't lose any we didn't lose any ground, but other institutions gained ground on how much they were receiving through the student success and completion model. Yeah, yep.
Chair Stevens, I have one more question. And it's really, again, you went over the motor pool and moving away from motor pool, but I didn't really get kind of the rationale deeply. I know it's probably going to be something about cost savings or operation savings or organizational logistics and not having to do all of that, but can you go over the motor pool decision one more time?
Could you repeat that? Sorry.
Go ahead and go over the motor pool one more time, how you got there.
Yes. So for years, we've had a motor pool on campus where you could go to facilities and basically get a car to go to Portland. We ended up with only 2 vehicles and they were all part of DAS. And so DAS has decided that it's not cost effective for them. And it wasn't cost effective for us to lease at a higher rate. So now you can just go to Goss or Legacy and rent that way. So it really wasn't a moneymaker for us either. We had to do all the maintenance on it and all the accounting behind it as somebody took it and how many miles did you drive? Did you fuel it? So we should see a lower cost on our fuel going forward because we're not investing in that. That answer your question?
Thanks, Leanne. We need to move on. Of course, we got tons of stuff to talk about, and I hope we don't poop you out here too much, Leanne, but thank you very much. And we're going to now go on to the historical overview.
So now I'm going to move into just some more information. This is really just charts and graphs for you, looking at historically, really focused only on E&G funds from 2018 to 23. So looking back 5 years. Looking at revenue and expenditures, kind of how our state funding and tuition revenues line up, our institutional fee remissions, our healthcare retirement costs, and what our fund balance looks like. So those are some of the major things. We have lots and lots more things that we could talk about on a historical basis. We could talk about how much travel has cost us over the last 5 years, how much each category of employee has talked about. If that's something that you desire, I'm happy to bring that back. So I try to start, I get in the weeds. So I try to like bring it up to a little bit higher level, but so this graph shows that education in general revenue and expenses / transfers from 2018 to 2023. Just graphically, you can see the light blue bars on my screen are the revenue, and the darker ones are the expenses. You can you barely see, revenue has been more than expenditures up until 22. And so now when you see that, that's where you're seeing the use of fund balance start to kick in. We weren't generating a great deal of money more than our expenditures, but we were able to put that towards our fund balance. And so when you see the fund balance, you're going to see that same trend, obviously, growing up and then dropping down a little bit. Tuition, state funding, and all of the revenues, importance here, the orange bar is government resources, what we get from the state. The blue is student fees. We like it when the orange bar is above the blue bar. And that means the state is contributing more than our students are. Unfortunately, the big piece of why the orange bar is above the blue bar in 23 is because we received $1 million for our visual and performing arts scholarship. So that is baked in there. So it gives it a little bit of a not realistic look at our state funding. But we have done pretty well. You see 21, our student our tuition and fees was a little bit higher than what our state funding is. So all the time that Tim spends in Salem, that Dr. Ryan will begin to spend in Salem, all of your help in Salem helps maintain that orange bar above the blue bar. So the gray bar is our other revenue. You can see other than those two things that are about 50-50, we don't have a lot of other levers as far as our revenue streams go for the E&G side of things. Fee remissions, again, you can just think of them in terms of scholarships. So you see, we've been investing more and more and more in our fee remission. We set a bar of using about 12.5% of gross tuition. That's kind of how we budget it out. Sometimes it's more, sometimes it's less, just the way that our fee remissions are allocated out to students. So it's growing. It's based on our tuition. Last year, FY23, it looks like we dropped off a whole bunch. We did not. We used athletic lottery funds to bridge the difference between that 2.4 and what would have been about a $3.1 million fee remission last year. They had the ability to do that. And then we also, we paid it out of E&G, we paid an expense for them. So net neutral at the end of the day, just optically, it looks like we really dropped off in our fee remissions. If you're interested in our fee remissions, 62% of our fee remissions last year went to resident students and the 38% went to non-resident students. So the way our fee remissions are set, for the most part, it just goes through a matrix. So we don't distinguish between resident, non-resident, on campus, off campus. It's just the student is the student. And when they go through, if they have a certain amount of need or a certain GPA, just kind of goes through there, and that's how they receive it. We do need to take a look at that, a little bit deeper dive, and make sure that that still optimizes our students and how we want to spend those fee remission dollars. We also we had 1,040 students, unique students that received the fee remission last year. Of those, 162 were from Washington and Idaho, and 71 were from the WUI region. So again, it just demonstrates that it's not all going to Oregon resident students. It's just based on the student demographics. We also look at it from a course side, from the academic side, to see where students are ending up. Big winners on this, as far as the course, is not necessarily a major. It just means that they, student receiving a fee remission took a course. Any guesses? HHP is the big winners there. So your PE folks, your outdoor folks, they all fall in the same category. Coming in next is business. So doesn't really have anything, it's just interesting. Doesn't really have anything to do with how we fund it. It's just always, I like to look at it and see what are students doing. You'll hear me talk a lot about healthcare and retirement costs. It's significant. This is, two of the three categories of OPE. It doesn't count in the Social Security FICA that we also pay. Our healthcare benefits, average out across all employees that are eligible at about $19,380 a year. So that's what Eastern contributes to our healthcare plans. Employees contribute either 3 or 5%, depending on what plan they've picked. So it's a pretty good deal at the end of the day. It's not free, certainly, but our contribution is significant, and our plan choices and options are also significant. Retirement costs, we talk a lot about PERS. There are a few other plans available as well, but for the most part, most of our employees pick PERS. This is all tiers that are built in there. Next year, PERS rates are set every biennium, so we know what our PERS rates are this year and next year. Tier 3, which is the where most of our employees fall, 29.88% out of every dollar subject salary is paid in and stuff. So that's what it costs us. Tier 3, tier 1 and tier 2, about 36%. So again, it's pretty significant at the end of the day. On the chart, you can see where our retirement costs have exceeded where our healthcare costs are. The more people we have, we've seen this kind of weird thing. The more people we have on healthcare, it just drives down because it's an average over everybody that's eligible. But because of the plans, we're seeing more and more employees picking the lower cost plans versus the high cost plans. So they're just more cost conscious and able to receive the same benefits here regionally. So that's a good thing to hear, because for a long time we have a plan called statewide. So it didn't matter where you were, you could just use that plan. And a lot of employees picked that just because there wasn't as much good health care available and stuff. And so just from an insurance standpoint, it was easier to take that higher cost plan. So that's kind of that weird. We're seeing that. The other institutions are seeing it go the other way. And our fund balance, we've had a lot of conversations in the last couple of months, but really every year we talk about the fund balance. Fund balance in 2018 was 19% of our revenue, or $7.8 million. Ramped up to $14 million by 2021 at almost 30%. And last year, we can see again where we started using our fund balance. We're down to about 24% at the end of fiscal year 23. In 21, a couple of things happened. We looked at the fund balance. It's always, it's always prevalent. It's always something that we're aware of, as is the campus. It's an old tracking the percentage by revenue has been done since the OUS days. So it's a metric that most of the campus recognizes. Ours was negative at a point in time. We never want to be there again. But in 2021, after we took a look at this, that's the year we froze tuition. So we did have some fund balance available. So we froze tuition, didn't raise tuition in 22. So those kinds of decisions are made not in a box, but that's one of the deciding factors on making some of those. Plus, we knew we were going to be ramping up quite a few academic programs. I needed startup costs to be able to do that. So $11 million, $12 million when you're standalone, and we'll have more conversations throughout the day about this. We don't have a fallback plan under the system. We could borrow from some other institution if we needed to. U of O would probably still says something about us borrowing money from them. We don't have that option anymore. We could get a line of credit if we run out of money, but there's not any other source of funding that we can go to. So it's critical that we are always aware of our finances. It's one of the best things I think to have happened with the break apart from the system, because it forced us to be independent, which seems obvious. But it forced us to really take a hard look at our finances and always be aware of them. When you're what we would call a rounding error of the system, it wasn't as important. Right or wrong, it just wasn't. We had a lot of other things to do operationally, and they took care of the finances really on the back end. So Tim remembers those days well, but I like where we are, and I like knowing where we are every day. Questions?
Can I just ask a question? Is there like an industry standard for fund balance as a percent of the general expenditure? A lot of boards I've been on, there's a kind of a
Yeah.
standard that you really like to be at, so.
You know, I don't know that there's an industry standard, but the board statement number 11 has a goal level of 20 to 25%, can drop down to 15, can go as high as 30. Oregon has always used it. Dr. I don't.
You know, it's fund balance percentage, but it's also months of operating expenses, right? And so at my former institution, we always aim to have, 3 months of operating expenses as part of our budget. And of course, our budget dollars changed every year, so the percentage did as well.
I've seen that number as well.
Brad, I just had, excuse me, something in here is not doing well with my throat. Anyway, so if we factor in inflation, how does that factor into our fund balance? Because if we say we have a 29% fund balance or a 23% or wherever it may be, does inflation enter into that as the years? How does that work?
I think if inflation would have stayed up, like it was in the 8 and 9 and 10% and going in that trend, it would have had a huge impact on us. Luckily, obviously our costs went up during that time, and we were spending more on utilities, we were spending more on travel, we were spending more on people. We talked about it during the collective bargaining agreement with the faculty. But it's really just how much we have at the end of the day. So we probably would have more if we hadn't had those costs. But on the flip side, we probably wouldn't have raised tuition as much either, because we don't have many levers to pull. So we had to raise tuition because of the inflationary costs. And it was in the middle of a biennium, so we weren't getting any additional funding from the state to cover it. So always a consideration when we're setting the budget and looking at our revenue streams.
Any other questions? Yes.
Leanne, in 21 and 22, we froze all tuition except for online out of state tuition. Is there a reason we chose to do that? And with doing that, have we seen, if we've seen an increase or a decrease in semester credit hours from online out of state students? Have we seen an increase or a decrease in online out of state students?
During 21?
Since 21, 22, since we raised the
I don't think so.
Okay.
I think our enrollment has been increasing. Look, she's got her numbers.
I happen to have that file up, and since 2021, enrollment has declined online, but so minimally. So if you look at 2021, we had 17,520 credit hours, 22, 1,704, and then 17,157 this year at the second week. So it hasn't greatly affected that. What I think the larger picture though, however, the demographic challenges, the online competition, and the unfortunate lack of trust and faith in higher education, I think those are our bigger drivers of enrollment these days. Yeah.
And you'll hear more about how we set tuition throughout the year. But with the online market, we really look at the market itself and where we sit nationally, where we sit regionally, where we sit locally, and then kind of pick and choose and see what that looks like for our demographic of students. Last year, you'll see we didn't raise it as high as we raised on campus because that we were right in the middle of that market value for our tuition per credit hour.
Oops, push the wrong one, yeah. Any other questions, folks? No, great. Thanks so much, Leanne. Take a deep breath and and we'll go on to student success and completion model.
I'll just remind folks, it's really helpful if you keep your mic within just 2 or 3 inches of your face. I've end up watching the videos of these quite a bit, and it's interesting how many times I just see and not much sound. So it's really helpful just to keep that in mind. Yeah, the problem's not my ear. It's keep the mic next to your face.
Okay, great. Thanks, Leanne. Go ahead.
All right. So this is a pretty deep dive into the student success and completion model. It's important for you to know how our dollars flow through this, but it's also important for you to know at the state level areas that you can influence. We don't have, so it's hard to influence the model the way it currently is, just because of the finite pot of money, but good if you have a base knowledge of it. So you can talk about it if you need to. I would never expect you to talk about it in this much detail. At the end, I'm also going to talk a little bit about the biennial funding, the additional state funding that we've all heard about through the legislative session. Tim's going to join me and we're just going to walk through a little more detail than what we provided very briefly at the end of the retreat in August, where we're at with that and how it influences our budget for this year. So stay tuned for that. We already talked about what the student success and completion model is, commonly referred to as the SSCM, trying to break through the acronyms that we use all of the time. Basic overview, it's a finite pot of funding for all the Oregon public universities. It's funding only for Oregon residents. It's based on student credit hours, degrees earned, has some regional access components and research support components, as well as public service. The numbers I'm going to show you are based on what we think right now, although there's a thing called the settle up where we have to wait and find out what enrollment and completions did from the year 23. So these numbers will change. I always add that in because somebody will always say, well, last month you said it was this, and this month it's different. It will change. We hope for the better. So that's the good thing. This is the definition of a resident student. Every institution certifies their resident students when they send it in. So they follow this, this definition. Doctoral students, which doesn't apply to us, but they don't have to have residency. Everyone else has to have residency. So we hear different things about the classification of things. So I moved here from Washington. My daughter, I moved in October of 2015. She graduated from high school in June of 2015, was admitted to Eastern before I started working. She is forever a non-resident student and was categorized as that throughout her college career. I think the same thing happened with Peter when he came here as well. It's where you are at that point in time and stuff. So I argued that she should get a count. I should at least get, something out of it and stuff. So, but we make those determinations here. System-wide, a very good year for the Oregon Public Universities. $999 million is going into the SSCM for this biennium. Some of you will remember we were looking at $972 million as part of the current service level. So it's more than that. And at one point in time, we were looking at much lower amounts until the economic forecast came out. So very pleased with this amount, thanks to everyone that worked on that. Again, these amounts are provided pre-fall settle up. They will change when we start to talk about not these numbers specifically, but when we start to talk about Eastern's funding, the numbers change. The funding on a biennium in Oregon is split 49% in the first year, 51% in the second year. Important to keep that in mind because when you look at trends, it could be that our state funding goes up and then it goes down in the next year. And so you kind of have to keep that in mind when you're switching bienniums. Always kind of throws me like, we should have more money. First year, $489 million will go into the pot of money to be distributed. 79, almost $80 million will go to mission support funding. Outcomes based, $246 million, and student credit hours, $164 million. This is all the money that's available for all 7 institutions. So in each bucket is, unless the mission support changes, each bucket is that amount of money available. Eastern's, specifically 49% of our allocation be about $24 million, $23.5 million. Second year of the biennium's really an estimate, but it should go up. This funding is just what rolls through the SSCM. It doesn't include our engineering technology sustaining funds. It doesn't include sports lottery. It doesn't include benefits navigator, strong start, the true plus PSU money, the SELP money, the CIR money, or the pilot EOU money. And we'll talk about a lot of those at the end of this. This is just we get a lot more money from the state, I guess is what I just want to point out, than just the SSCM component. Looking side by side, System 1 versus what does Eastern receive? We will see about $12 million, $12.8 million from the mission support funding. Outcomes based for our completer students, 6.7 million, and activity based almost $4 million. So it's all based on zip code. It's all based on what the student takes. They're weighted each one individually, and then it goes through the formula, and this is how it comes out. It's based on a 3-year trailing average. So it looks at this year, it'll look at how students did in 23, 22, and 21. So it looks at all 3 of those years. What's important about that is that you don't go up and down in enrollment, that you kind of stay steady. You can stay flat. You can even decline a little bit or increase, which we desire. But when you start going up and down, it really messes with the averages, and it's really hard to be able to track like what we're going to get. It's hard to forecast and stuff. So out of the OBF fund, the completion pool side of dollars, 2.75% of the total comes to Eastern, 2.42 in SCH or activity-based funding, 16%. We get the full amount of this mission support funding, which is the best thing to ever come out of the model for us. Total out of all of that, 4.8%. We're the smallest institution with the smallest enrollment. So they've done what they could to help shore up our funding, but the way that the model works is just never quite enough, and everyone would say that. Mission support, it's a base payment, it's FTE driven, it has a size factoring, the allocation is off the top, it includes line item funding, transition, has some different things in it. I wear hearing aids, and so my phone was ringing, and so I could hear my phone ringing. Could you hear it, Tim? I was like, what is that? Mission support funding. This is how it breaks down. There's categories within the mission support funding. Base funding, we get the full amount of 7.3 million. Regional access, it's formula driven, 3.5 million. Public service, 450,000, all based on 4th week numbers, 3-year average. Research support, this really is $4,648. And then To get us up to the full 16%, there's a little bit of a settle up of about 1.4. So that's, that's kind of our bump for being regional and being so small. So that's the positive part of the new model. Base funding, weedy, but base payment is $2.9 million annually. That's the base payment for all the institutions. And then you get money for if you have less than 4,000 resident FTE, you get a little bit of a bump, and then it factors in the institutional size factor of 1.2, where we have the biggest institutional size factor. Regional access works very similar. The payments are a little bit different. There's no base funding. Institutional size factor it comes into play, as does the 3-year FTE. Our 3-year FTE in what we're using right now, 1,300 Oregon residents with FTE wise. So that's what's in the model. Public service, same concept, $330 per resident FTE based on the 3-year average, capped at 4.7. That way, the larger institutions don't take up all of the money. So it's really was set so that it supported and it was equal across everyone. Again, that 1,365 FTE plays a role. Research support, we don't have a lot. It's very small. That's why we get $4,600. Activity-based, it's SCH driven by academic program and student level, 40%. So I probably should have started with that. Out of the pot of money, the mission support comes off the top, and then activity-based. The rest of the funding is split 40% for activity-based and 60% for completion dollars. Looking at how it breaks up for us, freshman and sophomore funding, about $1 million based on SCH, Oregon, only Oregon. Don't try to line this up with any of our enrollment data. This is only Oregon residents. Average funding per credit hour for a freshman and sophomore, almost $50. Juniors and seniors have different weightings. So there's a $65. Graduates also almost $65. You can see the SCH and how that's all calculated. Again, it's based on the 3-year average. Outcomes based are degree completion, degree and certificates by level and by discipline. There's also bumps for underrepresented, low income minority students, rural students, veteran students, completion bumps for STEM, health, and bilingual as well. Again, it's 60%. Degrees are funded based on bachelor's, master's, certificates, and PhDs. There's cost weightings for each one of them. Allocations, you get increases for Oregon community colleges, but regular transfers are actually decreased. You get a discounted rate because they don't figure transfer students cost us that much because we're only teaching them for a couple years and stuff. So out of all of that, for the Oregon degrees, non-transfers, $1.4 million, transfers, 2.3, community college bonus got us almost another $1 million. Oregon, should say Oregon in front of that. Certificates, 102, and then the bumps, the area of study bonus, 71,000, and then our targeted populations of 1.4. So completions got us the most money. SCH gets us the quickest money because the completions, we have to wait till they complete. The SCH goes in every single year. So it's just, we want students, it's just another reason we want students to complete so that we can get the additional funding. Non-transfers, no discount. It's a straight formula. Transfers, degrees are discounted to 62.5%. Add in the Oregon Community College bonus, you get a 37% additive. Degrees, graduate degrees, there's no discount. It's just how it comes out of the model. Areas of study, there's far more of these. I just put this in because it makes sense for Eastern. These are where we see areas of study bonuses: computer science, biology, physical science, health, medical administration, and math. So those are the areas where we have academic programs that we see a benefit from the model. The model has every institution in Oregon's degree added into it. Targeted populations, underrepresented minorities, low-income students, rural students, and veteran students. We get bonuses for those, so that's where you saw the $1.4 million. The way it works is if you are all four of those categories, we get bonuses for all four of those. Or we get a bonus for two categories. So it's kind of weird. You don't have to have all of them. We get, we've never reached four. We've never had a student that met all four of them. I think we've had a few students that meet all three of them and stuff. So. And I put this in there because everybody always asks, how are they defined? And this is how they're defined for our underrepresented minority. Low income students receive the Pell Grant at any time during their enrollment. Rural students, first time freshmen, it's how the high school is designated, and Trustee Mendoza can probably speak more to this and how that's done, but every school has a different designation. And this also played into our rural post-secondary education grant and stuff, and where we can fund those funds for. And then the veterans piece of it, it's all part of the data that we submit to the state. So as long as our data is clean and is accurate, we should get bonuses for all of these areas. This is kind of hard to see, and it's kind of important. So you would have thought I would have done it better. We get asked all the time, how much revenue does a student generate in each one of these different categories? So we put this together. It's pretty broad, but it gives you kind of a sense. So an Oregon student that comes here for 1 year doesn't complete. We do see the SCH funding. We would generate approximately $11,000 off of that student. That includes tuition, and that includes the state funding. So you can go down, look at an Oregon completer with one of those targeted student populations, bumps it up to $15,000. So it adds another $4,700 for one of those targeted populations. So you can see how that's kind of important. And then you look down at the non-Oregon folks. So you got a non-resident regional who's Washington and Idaho. We only generate $8,000. Not only, we get $8,600 off of those. We're only getting tuition, so we're not getting any state funding for those students. So I don't know that this is in your materials, but I'm happy to send this to you. But yeah, we look at this all kind of all the time. It's something that always gets asked. It's not perfect. Questions about the student success and completion model?
I do have a question. I think one of your early slides showed that we get 4.8% of the funding. How is that done over the years? Are we doing a little better or a little worse?
Very close. It's
About the same.
4.6, 4.88, somewhere right in that model.
Brad,
Here.
They say a camel is an animal designed by a committee. Dr. Ryan, I need to ask you, this is more complicated than the Oregon Health Authority. You've been different places. Are funding formulas like this a standard kind of thing, or did Oregon kind of?
It is actually standard, and it was intended to encourage us. Indiana had an equally intense funding formula, actually, so it's right on spot. Yeah.
Brad?
Before we had the SS. Oh, sorry, Chris.
I'm sorry. I thought I'd ask a question if you guys don't mind. So on that early chart, you had the outcomes-based formula pool. We're getting 2.75%. if we had better completions, would that number go up significantly?
It takes a lot to move the needle. And because it's a 3-year trailing average, it takes a lot, and we're competing against everyone else. But certainly, more will make a difference. But again, it's that finite pot of money that's available. So I think the last time I calculated it took like a 20% increase in enrollment to really make a huge difference in the model to us
So
in
we have,
Oregon students.
okay, so we have a significant change maintained over quite a long period of time that was better than our competing schools were doing. Okay, thanks.
May I add something to that? So I want to share that, yes, this funding model is important to us, but there are so many other reasons to invest in completions, including those re-enrollment dollars, right? So it may not always result in that larger monies coming from the state, but the re-enrollment dollars are so important to us. So if we can get more students moving year to year, at least the part of the pie revenue wise from re-enrollment and fees, which support our services, would increase. And I also want to share reputationally, that's incredibly important, right? So colleges now are really judged on completion. It used to be, how much do your alumni make, and what do your faculty do in terms of research output? But now if you look on college comparison sites like College Navigator's, success, completion, retention, those are real drivers of the way, we're kind of graded, if you will.
Love the presentation, good information. I was just thinking about, I am thinking a little bit about how schools work. Very similar. We have lots of different funding categories in schools based on poverty or based on rural access, based on migrant status, based on special ed, based on a lot of things and weighted factors. And we also have to have things for on track or graduation and achievement. But my point in all of this was we get paid the same whether you're brick and mortar or whether you're an online student. You get the same amount of money. Is that the same here? I suspect it's the same if you are online or brick and mortar from the state.
Modality doesn't make a difference.
Yeah,
They
so
just get more tuition dollars. Yep.
So it gets the same. And I guess the other thought I had on that topic was, and then on top of that, you have student tuition, which isn't factored in here, which is likely, the $12,000 or $11,000 per year. And then on top of that, you have so many staff. So for me, sometimes I think of like, how many employees do you have? How many employees at your campuses? How many employees online? Really, we get about $10,000 a student. Schools get that roughly, then you get other weighted factors on top of that. But those are the little things for me that would be nice to know, that you get so much money per student, then they pay their tuition, and then you have so many staff, and then I know that probably 80% to 90% goes towards employees and benefits, and then the other 10 to 15% is infrastructure. But those are things to me that if it was chopped up in a way, that would be good information, I'd say, for me too, but everything's great.
I appreciate that. It is a complex model because it depends on what degree you're in, what class you're taking, all of those things. And I'm happy to dive deeper into it. It makes a difference in what kind of decisions you make. People will always walk away from my presentation and say, you only want Oregon residents. And that's not true. It doesn't build the campus that we want, but it is a funding stream. So as we're talking about admissions and we're recruiting and stuff, we do talk about it and stuff. When I build the SSCM or the pro formas out for the degree programs and stuff, I do take into consideration where you might be getting the students from, because it makes a difference in the revenue stream at the end of the day. So, things like a theater program, just to give you kind of a context, theater program has a higher weight because it's technically considered a higher cost program. It takes more expenses to put that on versus business and education. Those deans probably don't agree. But that's just kind of how the model works out. And then that's degrees, and then it's very similar on those weights when it gets down to the class size. So to your previous point, before we had this model, we had what was called the resource allocation model. for the RAM, every body that came through Eastern was funded. So it was a similar, not as complex funding model, but that was in place before we had this one and stuff. So you just kind of like, it was more like the school districts, I think, where we were going and pulling people, times got tough. And so you were pulling somebody off the street just to come take a PE class and stuff, because we knew we were going to get money for them.
Leanne, one other quick question. I know that we keep talking about how this model doesn't really help Eastern, and we've been disadvantaged because of it. What would we change to make it better? How would we go after that?
What did we change between 15 and 21? Is that what you asked?
No, I'm sorry. We always are concerned because the funding model hasn't helped Eastern very much. We have this feeling we always hear that here. So if we were going to change the model and went to them to do that, to change the model, what are the areas we'd like to really change?
We have to dive into our data and see where our data would influence the model going forward. So that would be work that we would want to do now with institutional research, so that we're prepared at the table with the other institutions the next round. So.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
If I may again, one of the things that I really believe in is existing where you are and advocating for a better future. And so while we may have struggled under this funding model, there are ways for us to strategize within its current existence, thinking about encouraging completions by encouraging full course loads among our advisees, starting at a full course load and then moving from there, depending on student needs. So, we have to work towards getting our students towards completion. The funding model may not be working for us, but the mission is to get people to completion, to get them to re-enroll, and to get them to graduate with the least debt possible. And we know timely completion does that. And so we just have to be really mindful of that, of having the support for our students, encouraging their re-enrollment, and making sure we're getting them taking on credit hours that they can work towards fulfilling.
Well, thank you very much, Leanne. Thank you. A lot of work there. So we're time for a break, and
Do you want to run through the additional state funding before you take a break? Or is that,
I'm sorry.
it's all part of the same? Are we over time? Because we could skip this too. You can join me. We talked about this a little bit at the retreat. This chart shows not only are the SSCM dollars for the state, but also the other things that we are seeing this year. So COFA funding, again, the engineering, the sports lottery, the true planning support, the Strong Start funds, and how that breaks out. How it really will influence or not influence our budget. So we talked about the SSCM funding. We're also getting COFA, Compact of Free Association funds from the state again. This is the third year that we've received that funding. Basically bridges the difference between those students paying resident rates versus what we would have received from them in non-resident rates. It's a reimbursement basis. We don't get the $1.1 million up front. We have to enroll the students and then provide HEC with proof of the difference. Helps us a lot. We love these students here. We're glad to be able to help them achieve their education at a resident rate, while at the same time holding our finances true so that we were not negatively impacted by doing that. Eventually, probably next year, maybe the following year, these students will roll into the SSCM. So we will, in theory, lose the COFA funding. We won't have a line item for that, but you'll see it in the number of residents and the SCH and all of that stuff that comes out of the model. There's no additional, we got this funding, which was great, but there's no impact on our budget changes because I'd already built it into the preliminary budget. The True plus PSU sustainability funding, this is now $1,222,214. So the initial round from HEC gave us 605. They distributed extra funds to PSU. PSU honored the discussion around how the distribution should have been and provided us with the additional 400,000. I'm gonna turn it over to Tim and let him talk about this piece of it. This is all part of the $25 million that you've probably heard about since last spring that's coming into the TRUS plus PSU.
Thanks, Leanne. So this group is aware that we've been talking about this for during the last legislative session. It started out as a smaller package that just the TRUs were looking to access via the state legislature, looking at an earmark essentially. The governor put that fund into her budget, and then we partnered up with Portland State and expanded it. She had earmarked about I think it was about 15 million, and we added another 10 for a $25 million package that was ultimately funded. That did come with some strings, as you might guess, with the state and with all the folks we had to, work with to leverage those resources. What we have going on now is a work group made up of representatives from each of the 5 institutions. So that's the TRUs, which is Western, Southern, Eastern, and Oregon Tech, plus Portland State University. We sat down and looked at the first section of funding, or it was referred to it as a tranche of funding. For Eastern, it was very clear from the get-go, and consistently we were arguing that we needed those resources to support our retention and completion work that we're doing. Right now, we're using that with EAB, with the Moonshot for Equity project, where we're partnering with Blue Mountain and Treasure Valley Community College. That was highly encouraged. That's one of the focal points in these resources, is to how can we remove barriers for student access and completion at the 2- and 4-year levels, but also how are we leveraging the partnerships we already have in existence with our community colleges. Looking at, from a legislator's lens, they're constantly baffled as to why it's such a hard thing for students to transfer from a community college to a university, or between the universities. When we say a university says our Writing 121 is special and much different than the Writing 121 at another institution. But you can imagine as a parent or as a student, when you transfer somewhere and they say, hey, thanks so much, Cedric, for taking that class, but since you transferred here, you need to take our version of it. And you're like, wait a minute, it was Writing 121 and still Writing 121. Why? What's the problem there? We've been working on that for quite a while with our community college partners, and so we focused in on that's what we're gonna invest in. This first section of funding is with our Moonshot for Equity project, and really helping align what we're doing between these 3 institutions out here. The group, there's a larger work group. Like I said, made up of representatives from the universities, but also we have now at the table student representatives, faculty representatives, and labor representatives, also talking about how we're going to utilize the larger section of funds, the $18 million that we'll have to present to the legislature, how we're planning on doing that and what it's going to do for our institutions. It is very much focused on sustainability. So we can't use these funds to offset salary costs or put into our current E&G funding and try to just, it's intended to really look at sustainability. For us, we believe sustainability is access, retention, completion, right? We want that to happen. And that's been the focal point of our work group, is continuing to advocate for that. There's a lot of ideas on the table, ranging from how we could have could we create shared admissions processes for direct admissions for students throughout the state of Oregon, to do we move to semesters? Are there benefits to moving to a different academic calendar that would help our students for completion and retention, save the resources for the universities? Are there back office operations we can take a look at as well, in terms of sharing resources amongst the institutions and becoming more efficient? So we're really focused on what can we do to help drive efficiencies and student success. And for us, that is sustainability. So that's what's going forward. Now, that doesn't mean that there's not a big project idea that may come out of this, that we really do need to go back to the legislature and discuss changes to the funding formula and how much that would really impact each of our institutions, as we all know it will. And that discussion is already on the table right now. We just met yesterday for a couple hours with the larger work group, and that's certainly a discussion topic, as the funding formula itself. It's kind of hard to figure out how you might fund a University of Oregon and an Eastern Oregon University with the same model. As Leanne has showed you, it's an incredibly complex model. We continually find errors in it because it is so complex. There are easy things to fix. We have budget directors like Leanne going through and saying, this we lost here. Oh, we have to go back and fix that and make the adjustment. So it's a fairly complex model. There's probably something that needs to be looked into. How could we benefit from that? Different funding model, different funding strategy, perhaps two different funds. We're not sure, but that's part of the discussion that we're having right now with these funds on sustainable financial viability. I could answer any questions if folks have them.
Down the road, I'd love to know more about the work that you're doing with PSU, or what all of our TRUs and PSU are doing for financial viability, what programs and services are getting chopped up, and how you, I'll say, collaborate and partner on certain things too. That to me would be like a really good partnership conversation.
Yeah, yes, especially where it benefits Eastern, and it in particular benefits our students. The previous funding model that Leanne referred to, the resource allocation model, actually encouraged more of that type of work, more collaboration amongst the institutions, because we shared basically shared the student credit hours allocations. When you move to an outcomes-based model, we've now created a competitive model where whoever graduates the student gets the credit for gets the funding for that student. So that's required us to do some additional negotiations and discussions amongst our partners. On the other hand, I know with our Masters of Social Work, for example, we've already been working with Portland State University to how we can leverage resources and share them better. It's also trying to help explain that to legislators, where it sounds great, but the way that things you want us to do don't jive with the funding model. Because the more we share, from Eastern's perspective, the more we lose, unless we can figure out a model that encourages that. So it's this cyclical discussion we've been having for the last 20 or so years. We want to see greater outcomes, so we're going to create a funding model that only supports or highly supports outcomes, and then we say, okay, great. We're going to fight amongst ourselves to try to get more students to enroll at our institutions. And they say, why are you doing that? It's like, well, because the funding model is designed for the completion. So yeah, we need to look at programs then that are going to be designed around support of our region and the students we serve, and getting those students to complete with an EOU degree. So it makes sense.
Thanks, Tim. We're getting way behind here a little bit. Chuck, have you got a quick
Yeah,
question?
just
So
a quick question. Well, actually, yeah, well done. This is, as a newbie, this is all news to me. So what is this? What's the title of this effort with the work group? Is it the $25 million slush fund, or what do you call this thing?
Right now, it's just referred to as the TRUs plus $25 million fund.
Okay.
Yeah, we don't have like
It's
we haven't come out with a
slush
super
fund.
dynamic
Right.
term for it.
Well, Tim, thanks so much. And Leanne, we are behind schedule. So let's just try to come back at 20 of, and we'll proceed from there. But really great session. Thank you. Thanks, folks, for cutting this short. Right. Well, we've been through a lot, but we still have a lot to go on, and we're going to now start working on the scenarios and the Q4 management report, and then a draft operating budget. And I just want to remind us all that our Board of Trustees responsibilities, the one of the most important ones, including academic success, is fiscal responsibility. The financial stability of this university is totally our responsibility. And we don't want to get ourselves into the weeds of managing different decisions made at the lower level. But at this level, this is really critical for us. And so for us and our finance committee, what we do and what we will recommend to the board is really critical. So thank you for all your attention. And I think we're all impressed with the major details, but we're going to start doing scenarios.
Thank you. You'll notice in your materials that you only have a cover sheet for this agenda item. It's really just a starting point so that you understand that we're working on financial scenarios all of the time, building in different enrollment projections, different tuition projections, looking out not only to next fiscal year, but to next biennium and beyond. I thought about taking you through a variety of scenarios. It's a little bit early to maybe do that. Things that you do need to just keep in the back of your mind: a 1% tuition increase generates about $275,000 for us. A 1% change in enrollment is about $300,000. So as we talk about enrollment changes, that's just kind of in the back of your mind. Takes a lot to bridge a gap, and when we start using the fund balance, if we're going to try and balance budgets and stuff going forward. So there's always those levers of being able to utilize some fund balance, raise tuition as a last resort, look at more state funding, certainly look at our enrollments, which are new students coming in, as well as our retention goals and stuff. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Ryan just to talk a little bit more about the planning and her strategies for this current year and beyond.
So I thought I could start by sharing just some of the enrollment data. As we've mentioned, that's the driver of our revenue. And so I wanted to start out by sharing that we are up in headcount this year, which is good news. We're up in headcount by about 4%. But as you've seen, as we've discussed today, it's actually those credit hours that are drivers of our budget. And unfortunately, we're actually 1% down in credit hours. So what we have here is both an opportunity and a challenge for the institution to find ways to make sure that our students are re-enrolling as we move from term to term, and of course that they're taking loads that will lead them to success. And as we know, success most often is the shortest time to degree completion. Our first year students are up 6%. So that's another really good sign. Our first year students, it's a fragile spot though, right? So we have to work really hard to maintain them. And we've engaged in various efforts around campus vitality and mentoring and student support, some new initiatives we've rolled out in the last 3 months. Our transfer numbers are down, however, down 6%. And so that partnership that Tim mentioned with BMCC and TVCC, I just met with BMCC actually a couple days ago, and I'm meeting with TVCC next week, as well as, of course, our community partners throughout the state. It remains really important for us. Their numbers are down, right? So our community college partner numbers are down, and so our transfers naturally do the same. In terms of credit hours of on-campus versus online, the on-campus credit hours are basically flat. It's a 0% decrease, but there's like 20 students, like 20 credit hours less. So it's pretty flat. Our online is down 2%, and so that's where you're seeing that credit hour decline. So these are all issues for us to work on. You know, from the day I stepped foot on the ground, my big push is for student success. You know, as I shared at the convocation, it's about our mission and our values, but it also just makes plain old fashioned fiscal sense, right? We know the demographics are challenging. We have to do more and be more to retain our students. And that's our mission. Those are our values, and those are our never ending goals. And so we're doing a lot of work around that in the aforementioned Moonshot, the Title III grant, and that campus vitality and mentoring initiatives, all to kind of help us move on that. I thought too, I could just share briefly, our housing, just as a point of reference, because it did come up in the budget. We are up in housing numbers, which is good. That's an auxiliary fund, as you all know. We're up 29 students, which equals 9%. And of those students, you know, we're really benefiting from the first year. 23 of the 29 new students are first year students. So that new entering freshman class has been really helpful to us. As you've heard, though, expenditures are up. You know, they are up. Our credit hours aren't up. And of course, it's been, you know, almost a decade of strugglings around credit hours. So, you know, we're at a point with the institution where we really have to firm up the budget. We've started several new initiatives, including, you know, having a lot more collaboration around hiring. So now when we're hiring new positions, we're bringing them to cabinet, we're having discussions. We are a small campus, and we have to find ways to collaborate more and move across silos. So working together to better staff and serve our students is a priority for me. And of course, the other priority around staffing is always going to be student success. That just has to be our number one priority. Despite, you know, all these efforts and innovations, we are hopeful. You know, we are predicted to be down as you approved in May. We're hopeful that our investments in new programs will pay off. You've heard about the successes of the clinical mental health counseling program. And indeed, our graduate credit hours are up. The master's in accounting degree is going to be released here in the next term. And we have some other initiatives moving forward. You know, if we can move a wee bit more in our re-enrollment and encouraging and attracting new cohorts of students in these programs, it might not be quite as dire as it appears today. But nevertheless, you know, it does appear at this point that we're going to need an additional 1.3 from the reserves, which would keep us above the 20%, which is in the board statement. So we're hopeful to move this campus forward, both in re-enrollment and our new programming, while keeping the standard of the fund balance. It's going to be a tough year, and we're going to have to be mindful, I think, of future years as we start thinking about FY25 and work on that. Our expenses, you know, our student success is made possible through the labor of our faculty and staff, who, as you know, the costs rise to keep them every year in alignment with, you know, cost of living and the efforts they exert. And of course, they deserve to be rewarded for their efforts, but you know, it is a burden on a campus with very small margins. So we want to, you know, recognize the value of our labor while also, you know, working to trim the budget and make sure that this campus moves from, you know, surviving to thriving.
Well, thank you very much, President Ryan. Are some questions? Well, we're really grateful that you're here for us, and we're going to all work together to get to that success. So thank you very much. Okay, we're ready to go on to the fiscal 23 Q4 management report.
Thank you. Getting closer and closer to not having to listen to me. So, Q4 fiscal year 23 quarterly management report. Q4 ended June 30th. These are unaudited. We're still working on our financial statements, but they're pretty close. I don't expect that we'll see a lot of movement in these numbers. after the financial statements and are finally audited. I'm gonna look again. I've been through a lot of this, so I can probably breeze right through the quarterly management report, but we'll look at all 4 of these funds and then just a brief overview of the grant funding, the major grants. In your materials is the full report on the quarterly management. It includes all the details on the grants that we have, just kind of dollar wise and where they come from, as well as more details on the variances for each of the funds. So at the close of Q4, this is looking at all 4 funds combined. Eastern had received $58.1 million in our budgeted revenue, or 99%. So yay, 1% off. Recorded expenses and transfers of 58.2 million. So you can tell the difference. There's a little bit of a deficit there in all funds. Revenue increased 6.3% over the prior year and expenditures increased by 3 million. Labor expenses were only up 436,000 or 1.15%. I say only because we offset a lot of our labor expenses last year through the use of grants or other funds. So this number typically would rise to 4 to 6% on an annual basis. But through strategic measures of using those grants to not have to draw down our fund balance anymore, particularly on the E&G side of things, that number is artificially low. So as we move out through the years, you'll see this weird little dip in the trends of how our labor expenses look. There are no financial concerns with any of the major fund types. There was use of fund balance, but it was intentional and planned. And it was on the E&G side about half of what we had actually planned for. Highlights on the E&G side, it trends really with the all funds. 99% of the budgeted revenue was achieved. We used 97% of the expenditure transfer budget. Revenue in this particular fund was only up 5%. State allocations were up 1.7. Again, it's going to be a little bit of an artificial look when you look at the trends, because this does include the $1 million from the Visual and Performing Arts Scholarship. Total expenditures, including labor, were up 6% last year. Highlights, online undergraduate tuition revenue from the specifically in the College of STEM was up. MAT graduate tuition was also up, as well as Fire Service Administration, through the efforts really associated with the Rural Post-Secondary Education Grant that Kathleen Brown is heading up. We're seeing additional revenue from the early college dual credit initiatives. So that's a double win for us. We get them as they're in high school, and then hopefully they will matriculate to Eastern. So there's some recruiting efforts going on all the time there. I understand Trustee Mendoza has given us some space at the LeGrand as well. So Kathleen showed us some very nice space, as a matter of fact. So we're pretty excited about having a presence at the LeGrand High School. Credit overlay revenue is up as well. Indirect cost recovery, we had more grants last year. We get a little funding off of that. Interest earnings were up, offset with interest lost as well. But increases in faculty and classified compensation, and this is not listed as a call out that faculty and classified cost us more. Without APs, administrative professionals is the category where we offset a lot with the grant funding. So therefore last year it doesn't show as large of an increase for administrative professionals. But it does with faculty and classified, just when you're looking at the numbers. Student wages were up. That's a good thing. We are going to continue efforts in trying to drive more student labor on campus. We're down about $150,000 in student, what we spend on students for their wages over pre-pandemic years. We want them on campus. We want them working. It creates a connection to the campus. It also has another effect because we're seeing that on the work study side of things as well. This is all institutional dollars. On the work study side, we're also not spending that, and we're in jeopardy of having our work study funds reduced. So we want to really drive student labor on campus. If you have positions for students, get out there and get them hired. That's my plug for that. Increases in online expenses, increases in direct expenses, specifically in utilities, training and travel, investment loss. Those areas were particularly up last year. And again, we did offset some of our costs last year through the use of grants and alternative sources of revenue. Just a graphical look. It's always nice to kind of see. I like when the revenue goes up, the larger increases in the expenditure side are a little bit troublesome. This just shows the final budget and how it compares with the actuals at Q4 from 22 and the actuals from Q4 of 23. The prior year change, you can see the differences, and you can also see where our fund balance ended at the end of the year. We started at almost $13 million in our fund balance. We spent 1.1 million of it, driving our fund balance down to almost $12 million. 23.94% of the fund balance as a percentage, or 2.81 months of operating, just based on what our operating expenses were for last year. Comparing with the budget, you can see we had intended to spend $2.2 million of our fund balance. We were able to reduce that by 1.1, and some of it was through cost management, cost containment, but also in the budget, I had budgeted for the full amount of the Enlow Hall match. That did not happen last year, so that was a $500,000 change there. So in reality, I didn't know that until after. I didn't know we weren't going to do that until the end of May, or it would have shown up in a forecast. So we would have been shifting those dollars earlier. So that's good news. Puts us in a much better position than we had planned to be in when you looked at the preliminary fiscal year 24 budget last spring. And this is our transfers. Our transfers were a lot more last year. So you see, we had budgeted $1.7 million for transfers. In the prior year, we brought in 971 in transfers in, and last year we spent 947,000. It's almost a $2 million swing. So I wanted to include the details of how we got to that. This is money that moves in from fund to fund. We have to account for it this way, as I mentioned earlier, but this is how it kind of laid out. Transfers in, grant funds from our Oregon Teacher Pathway Scholarship support. We spend that money out of ENG, but we get that paid back to us through the grant for $132,000. HERF grants, the end of our HERF funding, we transferred in from that grant $277,000 to support pandemic bonuses for administrative professionals and faculty. Classified or not here, they received it in fiscal year 22. So it's not that they didn't get a bonus as well, it's just they didn't get it last fiscal year. They got it earlier. Transferred in from health services, $116,000 to support the athletic trainers. There'll be a lot more discussion this year on health service. It's negative. It has a negative cash balance, and it's spending far more expenditures than revenue is coming in. It's an on-campus fee. As on-campus enrollment declines or stays steady, that fund has been in jeopardy for quite a while. Lacey Carpillo, Vice President for Student Affairs, had a plan to get it to even and stay that way with a little bit of an increase, staying out of the negative cash realm, and then the pandemic hit. So with that has caused some issues. So institutionally, we just need to do a deeper dive and make some hard decisions on the student health side of things. We also transfer in for the administrative support from student health, $36,000. We use some of our general rental funds for support of campus-wide infrastructures in the IT area last year. And then in and out, here you do see the Enlow Hall match come in, but it also goes out. It's a net neutral. We just had to shift it around so we could show the state, demonstrate to them that we really did have that money that we have to have for the match on the Enlow Hall project. So just making sure they were aware. Transfers out, money that goes out of ENG to other funds, the Rev Center. We always support telecommunications. rather than doing a lot of small transfers, we just transfer out one at the end of the year. So the ENG supported units don't have to pay for their telephones. It's easier and faster administrative issue. Track and field capital project, this was the remaining balance on that project. We transferred this out of ENG into the capital funds to start to clear that fund out, but that's where you saw the increase usage of lottery for scholarships, but the decrease in fee remissions. So we just tied all those three things together to create a balance there. Fieldhouse capital projects and Enlow Hall capital projects. On capital projects, there's always unallowable expenses that the state won't let us use the bonds for. And ironically, one of those is related to the 1% for art. So a requirement that we have to have, however, some of the expenses that we incur for those, we are not allowed to use the bonds for. So we have to come up with a different source of funding. So we put aside $25,000 to $50,000 for every project, just for those unallowable expenses. The transfer out for the $1 million, we took the $1 million from the visual and performing arts and transferred out into a quasi endowment so that it can earn some interest. That will be coming back to you probably early spring to talk about how you want that to be invested. So we'll bring Penny Burgess back and talk a little bit deeper about that. Many of you may remember she had a preliminary look at it last spring, I believe. Enlow Hall match, and then student fees. Institutionally from ENG, we transfer out funds to the student fee committee to support the online activities. So student fee committee doesn't treat our students any differently, whether you're by modality. But they only on-campus students pay the incidental fee. So the institution per head pays the incidental fee committee for that. I believe it's $28 per head now. So auxiliaries, the auxiliaries did well last year. They have a positive balance, revenue over expenditures at the end of the year. We saw increases in camp revenue, housing and dining revenue. All of those areas just start to rebound from the pandemic. They ended the year with $9.4 million in cash, an increase in cash of $700,000 over the prior year. A lot of that is in lottery. A lot of it is in housing. We keep a fairly significant cash balance in housing for repairs and renovation, also for future improvements if we need to do them. We need seed money to build a new facility, so we can watch that, as well as they have debt service that they need to pay. Again, just a graphical look, that big drop, that's the pandemic year. That's on the expenditure side, so that's good. Looking at the auxiliaries by fund type. So these are all the individual funds that make up that fund type: housing, student fees. Everyone did well. You can see again where health service, $100,000 at the end of the year, revenue over expenses in the red. So a little more work to be done in that area. The larger balance in intercollegiate athletics, this is all lottery related. So we're getting additional lottery funds in. We've kind of been sitting on those and making a plan of how we want to utilize them. We know we want to utilize a larger portion for scholarships, which helps us on the ENG side as it did last year, and then some other capital projects and plans. There are some caveats behind that that we have to adhere to. So just trying to put all the ideas and initiatives and things that we want to do with those funds into that to make sure that it's legal, that we spend them in that way. Designated operations and service departments, very small. But we also saw increases in camp revenue. So camp revenue runs through here as well. So that is good news. Student pay was increased, advertising expenses, technical services, and then we had the transfers in and transfers out. Designated operations ended the year with cash balance of $1.2 million, and the service departments, $44,000. They're not intended to have a large cash balance. It's really a service to the institution, so it should be pretty low at all times. Just looking at the grants, and again, your document has more information on the grants. At the end of the year, we had 34 million in active grants, 1.4 or $14 million remaining to be spent. A lot of our grants are multi-year, so we show the full amount of them, like the Title III 5-year grant. It's $450,000 per year, but the whole amount shows up in the report. Our big grants, GoSTEM, David Melville has just worked his tail off to continue to get grants. I think I signed a new grant agreement for David maybe once a week and stuff. So that's great work that they're doing in the community, in the high schools, the K-12, the mobile maker, all of those things. Good work being done there through the College of Education. Strong Start funding was a grant last year. You'll see it as institutional funds coming in this year. A lot of work was done there. Thanks to Dean Lau on that. Title III is still progressing. We have 2 more years. We're entering the third year of the grant. And Future Ready was at this point 1 and done. We got $1.6 million for the Future Ready grant. We spent that last year. And then our Head Start program has been an active partner with us for many, many, many years. They too are bringing in lots of grants that help the daycares and elementary schools and all of those things with the services that they provide. What we see from them is really the indirect off of them, and then everything that they do for the education department as well. So we have finally spent out all of our CARES per ARP funding. We got 1.6 or $8.6 million. It was split between institutional support and student support. We fully expended that June 30th of 2023. So that was very helpful funding to get us through the pandemic for our students, also for the institution. So that was, we're very grateful that we had that funding. Questions?
Questions, folks? Oh, sorry. Yes.
Chair Stevens.
Thank you.
I have 3 and I'll try to be fast though. What is a quasi endowment?
Good question. A quasi endowment, it's actually, it's not a full endowment. And the technical definition, I believe, is in your materials if you really want to read exactly what it is. But it's a way we can move things in, but instead of being an endowment that we can't ever do anything out with and move any funds out of it, it just puts us in this quasi area so that if we needed some of that $1 million to do something else, we could retrieve it. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And then the other part to that was, what are we using the quasi endowment for? Because I didn't remember that.
Oh, sorry.
What was the purpose, or what is it funding, or is it funding anything yet?
Oh, the quasi endowment? Yeah, it was from the visual and performing arts funding that we got from the state last year. So we worked with music, art, and theater to provide more scholarships for their students. So they worked on the criteria and the amounts that they needed. We determined how much they would need on an annual basis to support those. And then we put the rest of it away so that we can continue to fund those off the residuals of that money.
And next question was on the track and field capital project. And I didn't know how many years we have left. Sorry. You can talk to me later on that. Then the last one is, what is our indirect rate? Because to me, sometimes I want to know how high it is or how low it is, because I've had indirect rates with other organizations, and sometimes
our indirect rate is 8% is what we get off of most things. Some of our federal grants is 68% of the personnel costs in there. We don't see that a lot. Our national science program grant, we do see that amount off of it, but for the most part, it's around 8%, sometimes 5%, sometimes
Wow.
4%.
I will tell you that we're doing a health, wellness, food, and nutrition grant that we received from the state. And we worked with OSU to do to hire staff. But anyway, we were going to do one with an indirect rate where they gave it to us at around 29%. And that was 29% of a staff member just for an indirect rate. So I felt like that was not.
Yeah, ours technically, we have to go through this process to figure out what what it is, and then they have to accept it. Ours is over 100%. So we have to negotiate. It used to be like 65, and we said, well, it should be a lot more. And they said, well, we'll give you 68. So that's what we can charge against them. But just for the federal side of things. And I was just kidding. I'm happy to talk about the field house. Or not the field, the track and field.
That's what this might be, correct?
Yeah. Yep.
And how many years?
The,
How many more years will we? And by the way, I think it was a great investment. I love that it happened, all of those things. Great for the university.
the debt service on the
Yes.
track, we have 6 more years to pay. It was technically considered equipment, so we could only go it out 8 or 10 years, I think, on the debt service. So it's about $80,000 a year. What you saw in the presentation was the final amount to finish the project out. So that was the amount of money that we were in deficit in the capital fund. So rather than running that deficit and continue to incur expenses, we shored that up. The only thing that's remaining now is the rest of the fundraising from the foundation that they have pledges for. So that's continuing to come in. If we do end up getting more donations, we'll shuffle those dollars around again and make sure that athletics gets their money back. But the project was a little more than what we anticipated, and we didn't get all of the fundraising that we had planned for.
Thank you very much, Leanne. So interesting enough, this is a position where we need as a and we'll do this with other items, but this is the first one we've had to do that. So okay, I'm sorry, chiefs. Anyways, we need a motion to approve and recommend this to the board. So we need a motion for that.
So moved.
Okay, Chuck Hoffman, approve us.
Second.
Second, George Mendoza. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Okay, pass unanimously. Thank you very much. Great, we're off to our last item, but maybe even our most important item, because we're looking to the future at this point and how we're going to handle our financial situation. And so we're going to look at the draft budget for fiscal 24.
Almost done.
Yep.
This is the draft FY 24 budget. In my process, we go from the planning process to the preliminary process that you approve that budget in May. We spend the summer refining and doing all of the work, looking at enrollments. We know now what our state funding is within reason. Because of this meeting, I'm able to present a draft budget to you, kind of in the interim, and then at the next meeting, you'll get the final budget. So it's kind of an interim step. It's really, for the most part, just looking at what has changed from the preliminary budget, and to give you a sense of what we'll bring back at the end of the month. We always we include this slide almost all the time, every time we present the budget. We want people to remember that we've made significant investments. It's not just we haven't just been building up our fund balance. We've been investing in new programs, people, technology, salaries, compensation, equipment, all of those things have been happening. At the same time, we've seen a decline in enrollment through the pandemic. We were still progressing forward as a campus. So we always kind of put that out there. Even with the increases in inflation, we've continued to move in the right direction. But we need those enrollments. We need the completions. We need the re-enrollments of students. It's just so critical. We don't have any levers to pull. Enrollment, state funding, which ties to enrollment, and tuition. So it's just at that point. All the programs that we have stood up so far, Masters in counseling, you've heard about that, doing very well. Some of the others were a little bit further behind, but we're hoping that they're going to rebound now. And we'll be moving forward in the right direction there, as well as all of the retention efforts that have gone on with the grants that we have. Reinvigorating the campus. Dr. Ryan's done a great job meeting with people and talking to people and just creating that sense of energy around the campus. So all of those things pay off with our students. Talking to our employees about, spending a couple of minutes, just getting to know a student, and creating that relationship, creating relationships through the mentoring program. There's just so much good going on. But as Dr. Ryan mentioned, we have cost escalations that are continuing this year and next year will look a little bit different than last year because we don't have those grants to offset things with. So a lot of changes going on there. Revenue budget, preliminary budget, $52 million, draft budget right now, 51.4, 51.5 million. Biggest change, student fees. When this was presented in the spring, there was a 7.5% enrollment growth built into it. That was based on some projections. It was based on all of the programs we were setting up, where those enrollments were going to come from, new students coming in. The reality is we're at 1.1 head count. SEH is a little bit lower, but we're banking on our retention being better. So I reduced that line. There's lots of lines in there, but I reduced that by almost $2 million. In turn, we received more from the state funding, so in SSCM than we thought we would. We're getting more through the additional legislative efforts than we had planned for. This budget was presented to you before the economic forecast came out. Once the economic forecast came out last May, things changed dramatically. We were hearing, no funding, and then there was a lot of funding available. So that also was good news. Gifts, grants, and contracts adjusted the indirect cost recovery up. Investments also rebounding. So we're seeing more investment income coming in, but it did lower the overall revenue projection by $626,000. Labor, I do the same thing. People come, people go. We hire new people. People retire. All of those things. Lowered the labor budget by $267,000. Doesn't have any, nobody's laid off. It's just really just shoring up the projections from last spring to what they look like today. Direct expenditures, same thing, moving in the right direction, down 40,000. And then transfers, cleaning up those transfers to what would be realistic this year based on what we needed to use for capital versus non-capital, taking out some of the noise that was clearly in the preliminary budget for the transfer side of things. Overall, a reduction, looking at a reduction in expenses. Built in, we had $2 million built into the preliminary budget for savings, for temporary savings, carried that forward into this draft, would put us at using $1.8 million in our fund balance for next year, bring our fund balance down to 10 million, which is just slightly below the 20% board goal. So as you heard Dr. Ryan say, would like to bring that revenue minus expenses use of fund balance down to 1.3, which means additional savings, additional efficiencies around campus, and it can also mean increased revenue. So if the 51 million is too low, that's a good thing if we get more than that. So a couple of different ways that we can reach that. We'd like to bring back and have some discussion about it, but right now the planning would be to bring you back a budget that shows a $1.3 million use of fund balance, puts us slightly above that 20% fund balance as a percent of revenue, but it does not balance the budget. It does not bring that number down to zero. It does put us within our fund balance goal. So depending on how you think about a balanced budget, whether that's zero or whether that's just staying within the board goals, that's really the discussion that the committee needs to have or could have. either today or when we come back in October, at the end of October. Changes from last year, there were significant changes. We talked about them earlier, you know, our labor costs, all of those things. We had the $1 million in visual and performing arts that flowed through last year's budget. You don't see that this year. We have additional fee remissions to add in because of the offset from athletics. So these are things that just changed from, if you look at the fiscal year 23 budget to this year's budget, of the differences there. We're seeing wage increases of $4.5 million on the budget. People didn't receive $4.5 million. We just had that money to offset those things from last year. So I can't say it enough. We had grant funds last year to help offset. We knew that it was intentional, but it does make it look kind of funky when you move into 24. Just a reminder of the board statement number 11. Board fund balance goal level is between 20 and 25%, low range of 15, high range of 30. Discussions have to happen.
Thank you once again, Leanne. Very good, but we were sure we have some questions. I guess I would just say that thank you for doing this and going for the 1.3 million more to get us above 20%. I think that we will have a discussion in the future about fund balance, but I really can't imagine it lowering. All the groups that have recommended it to us have been higher. I think our one group that advised us said that they thought they should have a 6 months fund balance. So nothing has been really lower. So I think we need to work to maintain this fund balance. And I think if we look ahead to the next 2 or 3 years, it's going to be more and more of a challenge. We just need to get enrollment up and we have to get costs down. And there's just no way around it. We have to somehow do that. So thank you all for what you're doing. And President Ryan, go get them. No, more questions or statements?
You know, the only thought I had is when we do explain, or when you do explain to the full board, back to some big picture and really kind of hitting home revenue versus expenses, and try to put that into short buckets. And it might be staffing, and it might be, you know, facilities, or it might be students, and however you do that. But in general, I thought you did a wonderful job.
Thank you. I'm not technically on the committee, so am I out of order to ask a question? And maybe I missed this. Leanne, that was amazing. Very good job. Thank you so much. Maybe I missed it, but was there a comparison between expenses per student versus revenue per student? Maybe I missed that.
You didn't. I haven't presented that.
Is that that would be a really difficult piece of information,
well, I mean, it
but
can either be really simple or really difficult. You could just take the number of heads we have and divide it by the expenses, and you could get that number. You can dive deeper into what we call the program level and just look at it from an academic program standpoint, where we take out all of the overhead and all of those things that go along with it. You do a deeper dive and look at modalities. So do online students cost us as much as an on-campus student? So it depends on what the inputs are and what you want to look at, for sure.
well, and there's so many variables. I
Mhm.
mean, if you try to compare online students versus on-site students, there's just so
Right.
many pieces and layers to that. I think it'd be difficult, but in running a business, you have to know how much it's costing to produce that widget and how much income you're getting out of that widget to really get a clear picture of where you are financially.
I agree. Holly Chafin and I worked for a while on doing just that, kind of really breaking it down. It requires a lot of work on our chart of accounts, and it requires a lot of inputs to be able to do it, and a lot of buy-in. So we headed down
Yeah.
that road probably in 17, 18, got derailed. So, but happy to bring it back because it is important. We need to know what our students cost and stuff. I get
Yeah.
asked by, ROI folks all the time, our tuition's higher, but our costs are lower. But somebody has to run the campus. The facilities still have to be here in some percentage to be
Right.
able to do that work. So the infrastructure piece of it always catches people off guard.
Yeah, it seems like it'd be in some cases kind of like comparing apples to oranges
Mhm.
in a way, but
Yeah.
somehow you have to have
Mhm.
some. I had another couple quick questions on that one expense. You showed labor labor was 1% increase. And I wondered how that ties into then the regular cost of 4 to 6%. That I maybe just missed something there.
No, it's super confusing. The increase last year of the 1%, took into account that we had offset a lot of salary and compensation with using grant dollars. So instead of on the E&G side, seeing the full cost for salaries and compensation for quite a few employees on campus, we used grant funds. So Strong Start grants or the Future Ready grant, several of those, you're just not seeing them on the E&G fund, employees getting paid, but they were paid out of the grant fund for some of their work.
I see. So it technically is a 4 to 6%.
Yeah.
It's just, okay.
Yeah, it's just a source of funding and stuff. So.
Okay, and then just one other question. We got that $1 million grant, I think from, was it Morrow County? Where did that show up in there?
It doesn't.
Okay.
It is a grant and it sits outside all of these funds. But great segue. I wish Tamara was here. We got $1 million from the Port of Morrow to fund students that came from District 57. We applied our own criteria. Those funds that Tim really worked hard to get us. We applied our own criteria. There's no modality change. We don't care. We don't care what level of student you are. You just have to be from Morrow County. We offered $9,000 per student to little over 100 students right now for the year through that money. Where we held a little bit of it so that we could re-award some more throughout the year. Very carefully, the Port of Morrow does not want recognition for this scholarship. They were clearly the pass-through. I just received an email from them yesterday. They want it to be called District 57. So we have called it the EOU Rural District 57 Scholarship. So, yeah,
Yeah, that's significant. I wish we could get every district to do the same.
Right.
Obviously that increased some enrollment from
Yeah.
that area.
And we don't have, obviously we have 100 students from District 57, but we didn't have a lot. So that's why the scholarship amount was so much, including our ASOU president. So.
Thank you. Once again, thank you for a great presentation.
How about any closing remarks? Does anybody? Well, I want to step back a little bit. I think we've worked really hard. We worked really hard today through all the finances and things, but we don't really remember what it's all about. Eastern is a wonderful place. We've got a tremendous student body, young people are doing so well. Our faculty is fantastic. The student faculty relationship is so low, they know each other. The staff is wonderful. So what we're doing here is really special. It's a lot of hard work and numbers, but what the result is fantastic. So go EOU. I guess I can declare the meeting adjourned.